Welcome to another episode of NFL News on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today talking a little bit about coaches, mostly about Eric Bieniemy. That's mostly what I want to talk about, but it's some other coaching news stuff going on as well. So this discussion about Eric Bieniemy and not having a head coach job at the time of this recording, he might wake up tomorrow, he has one, but him not having one and the discussion of minority candidates, head coaches, all that. This is a discussion I've had before, but it continues to be a topic of interest, and obviously we see it play out each year. And there's a number of thoughts I have on this, but specifically with Eric Bieniemy, I'll break it down like this. This is two ways that I'm looking at it. Number one, you can look at it in terms of how things actually go. Meaning, how do people get opportunities to be head coaches? What's the trends in the NFL and all that? If you're going by that, then yes, a lot of people are having very loud reactions to him not having a head coaching job. They're throwing out some accusations that are heavy. They are very upset, disappointed, everything. And if you are going by how things run in real life or how they usually go, then yes, there's a case to be made, because I often talk about the silliness of the head coaching carousel, from coaches that get labeled one thing and fired and everything, and then being rehired somewhere else as the head coach, or waiting a year and now being a hot head coach candidate, from coordinators that didn't really do anything, or that are getting positions based solely off what they did with their unit, or coordinators from the same staff getting head coaching jobs year after year, of all the different ridiculousness I tend to talk about. But that is how it goes. And so if you are looking at it from that frame of what the NFL does, then yes, it is no reason why Bieniemy shouldn't have a job. There's no excuse that you can make. All these things that people are saying, I agree with if we're looking at it from that lens, because what the NFL does now, as I mentioned, they reward you, or they claim they reward you because of what your unit did. And now I still will say, and I'll get to this in the second point, we don't know what goes on in those interviews as much as we think we do. We don't know what goes in. We don't know what the candidate is saying. We don't know what they're presenting to the team. We don't know what ideas they have that make them seem like a good candidate. But the writing on the wall is the people that get hired tend to be people that had a good unit. And for the most part, the last handful of years, those have just been offensive coordinators. Oh, you did this with this offense, so you must get a head coach job. Oh, you worked with that offense, you must get a head coach job. You somehow worked with that quarterback, you must get a head coach job. That's how it's been. And now even with defenses, oh, your defense was that good, you got to get a head coach job. Oh, you were in charge of a good defense, you got to get it. That's how it goes, or at least interviews and whatnot, and then the people that get hired. And so by that standard, Bieniemy should have a head coach job before anybody, because he's worked with the best offense. He's worked with the best quarterback. And I'm not even saying all the other stuff people usually say, he was responsible for this. He was responsible for Mahomes. He was responsible for the offense doing it. I'm not even going that far. I'm just saying that if you worked with that, you were part of it, people get head coach jobs for that. And so I will agree from that lens, Bieniemy should have one, because that's how they reward people. Now, the second lens, which is the one I operate from, is like the reality of it, of what it means to be a head coach and what should go into it. That part is different, because being a good coordinator does not equal being a good head coach. And hence why we've seen many teams not work out well, or coaching situations not work out well because of that. And so with that being said, just because you had a good unit, that does not, in my mind, mean, yes, you need to be a head coach. That might be how the NFL operates a lot, but that's not how it works in real life. I wouldn't say how it works, but as far as the results, that's not how it works, because we have plenty of coaches that go to be head coaches and they don't ever work out. And so being a good coordinator does not equal being a good head coach. And so going back to the interview, there's things that in the interview you're going to have to demonstrate that you are able to do, or that you have an idea of how you want to handle it, to make that person feel comfortable to hire you. And so that's not just the X's and O's. That's very little of it. Like your vision for a philosophy, for a team, for a culture. What specifically are you going to do to build that culture? What type of things are you looking for from the organization? What ways, like what are your instructions and thoughts and ideas and mandates on how you're going to get this team turned around? Obviously, there's going to be things about specific situations and roster things like, okay, what's your thoughts on this? But they want to gauge what's your ability to come in and execute a plan. And then they want to see your skill set as well. You might have the ideas, but do you have the skill set to execute, to lead, to be the person in charge? And so all these things and much more goes into it. And so you have to convey that in the interview and whatever discussions you have and whatnot. And so again, I don't know what happens in these interviews. None of us do. But whatever I would think, now I'm sure some teams aren't like this, but I would think most teams come away feeling like they at least did the minimum to make me feel comfortable to make this decision, because it is a big decision. It's not taking a franchise quarterback and all that, even though I think that's overblown, but it is a big decision because this person has more control than a quarterback. This person has control over all of it. And as much as people talk about quarterbacks, messing up a head coach and all these things, that could set you back as well. And so you're picking a person that you have to trust your resources into as the owner and whatnot. And sometimes as a GM, the guy you're trusting to, keep your job and execute your plan. So a lot goes into that, and every situation is different. Every team is different, but a lot goes into that. And so that goes to the stories or the rumors of what have you, that Bieniemy doesn't interview well. What that means, we don't know. It's vague. It's vague probably for a reason. For the same reason you don't even know how an interview looks for a head coaching job. And so we don't know, again, exactly what happens in these interviews. And so at the same breath, we won't know exactly which part of the interview that he struggles with. And so a lot of people are defending that when they have no reasonable way to even know. Like, again, it's one thing for a local media person, even a national media person, to say something, but another for fans, like random fans. That ain't true. This is that. How would you know if it's true? How would you know if Bieniemy if they're lying about that? Not to say that because it's a rumor, it has to be true, but the talks are within NFL circles. If you believe the reports, that is how it happens with Bieniemy. Now, again, you might not believe that, even if you don't have evidence, but you look at the results. Is it more feasible to me that Bieniemy doesn't convey his message as a head coach well enough to sell a team? Or is it more believable to me that every team is trying to keep him out because he's black? That's ridiculous to me. Because, again, I'm not saying or dismissing that some teams don't have certain biases and whatnot, or whoever makes the decisions, I should say. But to sit here and listen to some of these people claim that the NFL teams are actively trying to stop him. Why? Why him of all people? What is so different about Bieniemy than Mike Tomlin or Anthony Lynn, or Marvin Lewis or Robert Saleh or anybody else that might be a minority that has coached in the NFL before? Like, what's so different about Eric Bieniemy that they have to make sure they keep him out of a head coaching job? It doesn't compute to me. And I'm not, again, dismissing it as some, small part of the bigger piece. But to me, there's no way that's the one reason. It has to be a bigger answer than that. And so we've seen it happen last year. Now we're seeing it happen this year. And again, he might get the Texans job by the time I post this video. And so he's a head coach now. And that's what kills me is like people are like the NFL's conspiring against him and all these other things. And it reminds me of the draft. It reminds me of the NFL draft where it's like teams will be like, well, we passed on DK Metcalf. Guess what? All the teams passed on DK Metcalf. We passed up on Russ Wilson. All the teams passed up on Russ Wilson. Only one team can take you. That's why I don't get. Like, people lose such sight of the context. Like, if 31 teams said this player is trash and not worth the first round pick, and the one team decided to draft him at number 5, guess what? He's a top 5 pick. And it doesn't have anything to do with the skill set, what they're going to produce, all these other things that people try to attribute to where you got picked. All it matters is one team believed in you. It's the same thing with Eric Bieniemy. Like, because everybody wants to count. All we want to do is count numbers. How many coaches we got, blah, blah, blah. How many black coaches do we have, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if he gets the Texans head coach job, it doesn't matter if he was the first person hired or the last person hired or the third or the sixth. He's a head coach. And you will count him just the same. Like, you can only go to one team. It doesn't matter if every team offered you or if one team offered you, you only can take one job. And that's funny because I feel like my professor in my master's, that's what she would say. It's like, it does, like, that stuff don't matter. Like, obviously, it changes if you have options, but you only can accept one job. So, that other stuff is just patting you on the back. The important part is that you got the job. And so, and then again, it goes back to this counting thing that it just doesn't make sense to me, man. Like, again, I'm not saying Bieniemy shouldn't be a head coach because I have no idea what his interviews are like or what any of that is. I don't know him personally, but what I'm saying is that it is very much possible that there's other reasons he's not a head coach other than just because he's black. And some people are acting like that's not even a possibility. And I disagree with that. Now, the bigger thing about the minority coaches, it always bothers me. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, people get so caught up in just quotas. Literally, that's all they talk about. How many coaches we got? Like when Anthony Lynn got fired. The conversation wasn't about what he could do or what he did or what happened. The conversation was, that's one less black coach. We got to replenish that. Like, it was just a number and it has nothing to do with the actual skill. Like, it's 32 teams. If 32 head coaches were all black, but they were not good coaches, would that be satisfying? And that's the question I always have. Would that be satisfying? And I'm not saying there's not 32 qualified people that could be good head coaches, but I'm asking, would it be okay for you if 32% or 32%, 32 coaches, 100% were black, but all of them were bad coaches? What matters more? Is that we have good coaches or that we have black coaches? And everyone keeps talking about representation, representative of the population. This is not a survey. Like, this is not a TV show depicting history. Like, what are you talking about? You don't have to reflect the population. Like, yes, again, representation is important to certain people and different things, blah, blah, I get that. But there's no mandate. That does not reflect anything with the game of football, that you have to be representative of the population. That makes no sense. Like, I've been a coach and been under coaches of color with mostly white teams. I've seen coaches that are white with mostly black teams. I've seen Latino coaches coach a team with only white people. Like, that doesn't matter as much as can you do the job. And so when we start just counting rather than looking at what people are doing, it messes it up for me. Now, that doesn't mean we just get to sweep it under the rug. I get that. I know people can hide behind the qualifications as an excuse to keep people out. So we have to continue to look for those things, but it's hard. As much as you think you want to be right, or as much as you think you are right, it is darn near impossible for you to prove that. There's a reason in legal terms it's really hard to prove discrimination and hostile work environments. Because even if you to your soul believe you know the owner's racist or this or that, as a fan, unless you have proof that they just said it, like you recorded them just saying it, you're going to be hard pressed to prove that that's their intentions. And no matter what you say, you do not have the ability to read people's intentions. You can think it all you want, you can know it all you want, but that does not actually turn into evidence unless we start getting to being able to read minds. And we're not there yet. And so this idea that is widespread discrimination in these different things, even if true, very hard to prove. Now, what I do know is that what I've said all these years, the pool has to continue to get stronger. And I think it is not just with African American coaches, but coaches of different racial minorities. And we have, women as well, and female identifying or women coaches who are now coaching and getting into that on all different levels. And so as you can increase that pool, that's what happens. I mean, like anything else, like we have a female referee in the NFL, or has been for a while. But guess what? If there's one female referee in the country, then it's going to be hard to expect to have, a good number of them in the NFL. You have to start somewhere. And so I'm not saying there's one African-American coach, obviously, but as I get back into my routine and in circles with draft and coaching and other things, the fact is that it is not mostly, but it is a majority Caucasian males. That's what it is. And so not only from the lower level, but then when you think about the path of an NFL coach, especially a head coach, most times it has something to do with college, because grad assistant is usually where people start off. Then they continue through college, or they go through a quality control position in the NFL, or sometimes an internship, and then they work their way up from wherever. But that starts with having that college degree. And then we go into the whole education side of it, which I can do all day, but I'm not. And you obviously know that when in terms of numbers, that's a huge disparity as far as African American males and Caucasian males of who's getting college degrees. And so that it ravels a whole different thing. And so you have to look at all those factors before you just throw out those allegations. And that's the biggest thing for me. And so I'm not going to sit here and definitively stomp my feet and pound the fist and say this is all racism or we need to have more black coaches. Like, to me, there's much bigger things at play than that. And that was a lot. Lastly, I'll just throw this in there. There's other stuff, but lastly, I'll just say Josh McCown interview for the Texans head coach job. I find that highly interesting, especially when we're talking about pathways to head coaching and all this other stuff. And this isn't really about being white or black or anything. This is just purely unprecedented. Like, I believe he was on the active roster this year. And so we're talking about some NBA type stuff where you step off the field or court straight into a head coach position. That's unheard of in the NFL. Absolutely unheard of. Now, I don't think they're going to hire Josh McCown. There'd be a lot of questions if they did. But the fact that he even got an interview, like, there's a lot of stuff like, what's his name? Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator for the Panthers. He got a head coaching interview. And that to me was like, whoa, this dude's only been coaching for 4 years. Like, this is crazy. And that was a stretch, but I could understand that way more than interviewing a current player. I don't care who it is. First of all, basketball, they've already shown that being a great player does not equal being a great coach. In the NFL, 1,000%, no, 1,000,000%. That has nothing to do with it. And especially a head coach. Like, it's one thing to be, Jerry Rice and then try to be a receivers coach and ended up being great at it. It's a whole nother thing to say, oh, I was a great player, I could run a whole NFL team. That's crazy. So I am just interested to see what comes of it. But they said the idea was surrounding him with a lot of veteran coaches, but that he knows the game. He has a relationship with the players, and that he is a leader to the point where they feel comfortable that he could do that. Now, as much as I think that's crazy, it does fall into what I've been saying. We got Gerard Mayo, another former player, who coaches inside linebackers with the Patriots, and somebody felt he was worth an interview for a head coaching job, not because of what you did with your unit as a coordinator, but because of what you have skill set wise. And again, the job of or the pathway is not good coordinator equals good head coach. It's much different than that. And so I have to applaud, them going at these different angles, but that threw me out of left field. So I'm curious to see how that works out. Anyway, that's it for me. Go down comment section. Let me know what you think. Share around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.